What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you each and every Monday and Thursday by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I cover the Nashville Predators here at the Hockey News. I'm joined on this Monday by my wonderful co-host, Michael Augello, who covers the Buffalo Sabres here for us at the Hockey News. And busy week here. We've got the trade deadline coming up in just a few days. But before we get into all of the bite-sized storylines from around the NHL, do want to let you know that we are brought to you by our good friends at Sticks.com. Hey, hockey players, why drop a fortune on your sticks when you can snag pro-level composite sticks at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. These all-black beauties are made for sniping, saucing, and shutting it down, all while looking sharp on the ice. And the best part? Prices start at just $85.13 US for a 3-pack. Yep, you heard that right. Elite sticks without the elite price. Hit up Sticks.com, that's STIX.com now, and gear up without the markup. Let's go. All right. Early start to the trade deadline action here already, Michael. We saw the Florida Panthers acquire Seth Jones from Chicago in exchange for Spencer Knight and a first-round pick, and Chicago retains 25% of Jones' $9.5 million cap hit. So that's about $2.5 million. What do you think? What are your overall thoughts on the trade? Do you think this was a strong return for the Blackhawks in particular, considering where they are in their organizational timeline?
I think it's a pretty good return for the Blackhawks because Seth Jones is $9.5 million cap hit for somebody who's in his early 30s and has dropped off, I think, significantly from when he played for Columbus. Spencer Knight is 24 years old. I think he was penciled in to be the goalie of the future with the Panthers. Had some issues, came through them, now is playing, and I think can play better. He's got a lot of talent. But that $9.5 million salary and the term that was remaining was something that was a big challenge for Kyle Davidson to move, and to get a goaltender who I think will be their number one for the next 5 or 6 years is a good return. From the Florida perspective, I mean, as soon as the deal was made, I said Matthew Tkachuk is out for the remainder of the season. The news that came down today is that he's going to be out probably. They said long term, but he'll be back for the playoffs. Yeah, he'll be back for game one. This is Mark Stone part deux. So that's what's going on there, and it's a smart move by Bill Zito. He's putting all his chips into the middle of the table, and he's added a right-hand defenseman who I think will play better in the Florida system. But I think the long-term effect of this is say goodbye to either Aaron Ekblad or Sam Bennett, because with that contract, even at $7 million, I don't see how Florida brings both of them back in the summer.
Well, it also kind of makes you wonder what Florida's plan is in net now for the future. Like you said, Spencer Knight was supposed to be their guy with Sergei Bobrovsky. I believe his contract expires next year. So it kind of does make you wonder what exactly the plan is for them in net going forward as well. So definitely an interesting trade, one that we may not see the full ramifications of here for a couple seasons now, but that's how it tends to go. Another trade that happened over the weekend, the New York Rangers traded Ryan Lindgren, Jimmy Vesey, and Hank Kempf to Colorado for Juuso Parssinen, Calvin DeHaan, a second-round pick, and a fourth-round pick. So the Rangers are retaining 50% of Ryan Lindgren's salary. So that's about $2.25 million from his $4.5 million cap hit. So now the Avs have been looking for a defenseman for a while now. Do you think now that they've gotten Lindgren, will they end up having one of the strongest D cores in the West when they're fully healthy? Obviously, Josh Manson still injured right now, but of course they always have Cale Makar. Where do you think this defensive core stacks up against other teams in the West with this addition of Ryan Lindgren?
Well, you have one of the best defensive pairings in the league in Devon Taves and Makar. So you start there, and you expect Manson to be back for the playoffs. You add him to Sam Girard, and now you add Lindgren. I mean, Lindgren was a top pairing defenseman last year with Adam Fox. People who have observed him with the Rangers think he's dropped off significantly. He's been a warrior. He's blocked a ton of shots, logged a lot of minutes. He's played through injuries. I still think he can be an effective bottom pairing guy, maybe penalty kills, but I think that's a good acquisition, lengthens the depth of the Colorado blue line. And if Manson does come back for the playoffs, then I think you have 5 pretty good defensemen.
Definitely will be a force to be reckoned with easily. Of course, another trade going down in the Central Division between 2 Central Division opponents this week. Gus Nyquist from the Nashville Predators was traded to the Minnesota Wild for a second-round pick in the 2026 draft. Nashville, of course, retained 50% of his cap hit as well. He is on a deal expiring at the end of this year. So, fun fact about that one, Gus Nyquist has been moved 3 times in the last 6 deadline seasons. So he should help the Wild in their push for the playoffs here. And, they're getting him, as I said, at 50% retained. So that's a bonus. It's a good deal for them. But again, he is on an expiring contract. He is a textbook rental. Do you think that maybe Minnesota should have looked for something a little bit more impactful for the long term to add to their roster, considering, they've already now traded 5 of their own 7 picks for the 2025 draft, and now they're dipping into 2026 by sending a second-round pick to Nashville, which I personally think is a huge win for Nashville in this trade. So looking at that, Minnesota's draft capital is kind of running out. Was this a good move for them? Do you think that they should have maybe gone for a player with a little bit more term?
I think that they would have liked to have done that, but I mean, their cap situation right now, I mean, this deal was announced and then there seemed to be a little bit of a holdup. And then finally it was confirmed, and the interpretation of that was they were sort of bickering over the salary retention, because Minnesota, I mean, right now, I mean, I think we detailed on a previous show, they're getting killed right now with that retention because of the money from the Brian Suter and Zach Parise buyouts. I mean, I think it's $14 million between the two, and it drops off significantly in the summer. Now, Nyquist, they know they had him before. He's not having a particularly great year, 21 points with the Preds. I think the second round pick was more for salary retention, Emma. I mean, I think, he's an effective player, and I think he can plug in because, Joel Eriksson got hurt. But I think this was more, they paid the second round pick because that the 50% of Gustav Nyquist was all they really could afford. So, it's what they could do. Maybe they would have liked to have been able to acquire somebody who had a little more of a long-term effect, but they really can take care of that in the summer when they have more cap space to work with.
Well, we already talked about Ryan Lindgren getting traded to Colorado, but his brother, Charlie Lindgren, is making headlines as well. The Capitals have re-signed Charlie to a 3-year, $9 million contract extension. Even with pieces on this Capitals roster that maybe by age is just a number, but let's just say aging out, guys like Alex Ovechkin and John Carlson, looking at where they are right now as one of the teams to beat in the East, do the Capitals have a longer competitive window now, do you think, now that both of their goaltenders have re-signed? Because we've talked about this earlier on the show. We kind of said, well, they can probably only afford to re-sign one of them. And then when they re-signed Logan Thompson, it was okay, so that'll be that. But now they have re-signed both. So what do you think this does, if anything, for their contention window going forward?
Well, it's definitely stability between the pipes. I mean, they've extended Logan Thompson, who's having a really good year. Not good enough for Team Canada, but, good enough. And Lindgren is a fine goaltender. He was placed in the position of being the starter last year when Darcy Kemper was not playing well, and got them in the playoffs. You look at the two extensions, they're paying a little over $8 million. I think it's maybe closer to $9 million for the two goaltenders starting next year. And the cap situation for the Capitals really clears up a lot because they're in the final year, even though they're on LTIR, they're in the final year of TJ Oshie's deal. They're in the final year of Nicholas Backstrom's deal. They're the buyout of Evgeny Kuznetsov clears. So they're clearing out a lot of money, even though it's not having cap ramifications, it is having budget ramifications. So they can go ahead and they can extend these goaltenders, and really they have now the budget to do that. And the way this team is playing under Spencer Carberry, I mean, you can't really complain. You can't really criticize what they're doing. Everything so far they've done this year is turned to gold.
Definitely. And as I said, Washington, one of the teams to beat in the East. Another team, though, that has been making some noise, rather surprisingly, in the East is the Columbus Blue Jackets. They beat the Red Wings in the Stadium Series game over the weekend, and the Blue Jackets moved into the top wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference. So GM Don Waddell said this week that with the way that this team has battled through adversity all season, from the tragedy with Johnny Gaudreau to the injuries that they've dealt with on the roster, he says that he wants to, quote, give this group a chance, and that he doesn't see selling as an option at the deadline. Do you think that that's the right move for the Blue Jackets? You know, as I said, they're kind of tenuously in this wild card spot right now. We know they're not selling. If they go buying, if they start to go shopping, what do you think they need?
Well, I looked at where they are in terms of goals against, in terms of goals for. I think they've been able to score enough, and they've been able to do that without Sean Monahan in the lineup. He's on injured reserve. Chinnikov is a good forward. He's on injured reserve. Kevin Labanc, who they brought in on a 1-year contract, he's on injured reserve. So they've lost some firepower there, but they've still been able to score. They have a lot of young talent. Defensively, they've given up 196 goals. And part of that, I think, is their goaltending, which I'm surprised that they're in a playoff spot with the way that Merzlikins and Tarasov have played. So short of getting a goaltender, I mean, could you see them trade for, say, John Gibson? I mean, that would be a long-term type of thing. I don't know if Gibson would waive. I think he has a partial no trade, whether he would waive to go to Columbus. He's from Pittsburgh, so it's not exactly far from home. But if I had to say one position, I would say a defenseman or a two-way forward, because I think they need to solidify their defensive game. And I think that will be the key for them to be able to make the playoffs. If they keep allowing as many goals as they are right now, it's going to be a tenuous situation and a fight down to the end for them.
Well, as we said, they are not going to be sellers at the deadline, but one team that definitely will be a seller is the San Jose Sharks. So a lot of names coming around there. We've already seen Mikael Granlund get traded to the Dallas Stars along with Cody Ceci. So definitely started to see some movement there already. But another name that's floating out there is Luke Kunin. So he's got a $2.75 million cap hit. He's a pending UFA after this season. He's one of the names that's out there that's rumored to be getting moved at the deadline. There's a large group of these third line center type guys that are being, kind of brought up in these trade rumors. But looking at, if they were to make a trade involving Luke Kunin, what do you think the Sharks should be looking for in return?
I think ideally they're going to get a draft pick. You look at what, some of these third line center types, Scott Lawton, the Philadelphia Flyers are asking for a first round pick. I think that's patently absurd. He's not a bad player, but he's not exactly an offensive threat. So you can ask for anything, but are you going to get that? No. I think, a Lawton will get a second round pick. I think a Braden Shen will get a first round pick and something. Kunin is of that second tier of potential deadline rentals. I think he's sort of at the higher end of the second tier, but that means probably a third round pick, maybe a second round pick, and his salary. I mean, they can't, the unfortunate thing for San Jose is they can't retain salary. They could increase their return if somebody could retain Kunin at $2.75 million as his AAV. The only way you can really do that is to maybe trade through a third team. And some of these contenders, they don't have a ton of cap space. So if that deal is favorable to a team like a Toronto or a Florida or somebody who's looking for one more forward, they might have to get a third team in the mix. But I think he's going to get moved, and I think they'll get a decent draft pick for him.
Well, as we said, Columbus not selling, San Jose selling. One team that we still do not have a clear answer on in terms of what direction they're going to go in at the trade deadline is the St. Louis Blues. Still unclear. There have been guys like you mentioned, Braden Shen. There's also Pavel Buchnevich, Colton Parayko, Jordan Binnington. All of these guys have been rumored to be possible trade pieces. And the team has now rattled off 5 straight wins, and they are just 1 point back of the second wildcard spot in the West. So looking at how the team is doing right now, looking at all of these potential trade pieces that they have, what do you think that Doug Armstrong should be doing with the Blues at the deadline? And I guess follow up to that, what do you think he should do, but what do you think he will do?
Doug Armstrong famously, and I can't remember how many years back this was, the Blues were in a playoff spot at the deadline, and he traded Paul Stastny, I believe it was to Winnipeg. So where they are in the standings doesn't mean a good whatever to him. I think he will make the move if he gets the return that he is looking for. Now, I think he's being completely unreasonable when it comes to at least what is being floated out there in terms of the rumor sphere for Braden Shen. I mean, the talk is that he wants a first round pick, a top prospect, and another player. And this is a 33-year-old player who's making $6.5 million for another 3 seasons after this year. I think he's a really good player, but I think the considerations of him dropping off have to be factored into the return. And he's asking for the moon, and I don't think he's going to get the moon. But they've made his situation difficult here because they're 1 point out of a playoff spot. They're 1 point behind Calgary and Vancouver, so they're in the race. But I don't know if that means anything to him. I think it's the return, and I think any one of those players that you mentioned could be moved if he gets what he's asking for. But what he's asking for is way too much. But if somebody is willing to pay it, he'll do it.
Well, those names, some of those guys we could see maybe traded before the deadline or even in an off-season deal when there's a little bit more flexibility. So definitely a team to keep an eye on as we kind of figure out what exactly St. Louis is trying to do here. But for now, let's move on from the deadline talk and let's talk about, what's real and what's going on the ice. Let's go up to Montreal. Cole Caufield scored his 29th goal on Saturday against Michael, your Buffalo Sabres. He set a new career high. Is he on the verge of becoming this, top goal scorer that he was sort of projected to be? Do you think, as I said, he's at 29 right now, could he get to 40 this season? Is that unreasonable to expect?
No, I don't think so. I'm still puzzled, and I talk about this with Russ Cohen, who is one of the co-editors for the Montreal Canadiens for the Hockey News. Caufield was there for the Philadelphia Flyers in the first round the year he was drafted, and the Flyers traded down and traded out, and Montreal took Cole Caufield. And I think it's that prejudice against the smaller player. It's there are like Alex DeBrincat slipped into the second round in 2016. Why? Because he was small. And I don't get it anymore. That doesn't mean anything in this league anymore. It's talent, it's speed, it's skill. You can get away with having a player who's 5'8" and 175 pounds like Cole Caufield is. Now, do you think Do you think the Philadelphia Flyers are regretting the fact that they took I can't remember the defenseman that they took in the first round and Bobby Brink in the second round, or do you think they would kill to have Cole Caufield playing on one line and Matvei Michkov playing on another line? So I think he's a 40-goal scorer. I think potentially if he stays with Nick Suzuki, who is a really good offensive center, that he could score 50 goals. I think health is probably the only issue. Sometimes, he gets dinged up, but he's a talent and a really good player. And I also think he should be on Team USA for the Olympics next February in Milano Cortina.
Yeah, we talked about that. Cole Caufield being one of the snubs, perhaps, for Team USA at the Four Nations face-off. So definitely an exciting young player to keep an eye on there. Another exciting player, not as young, but still exciting, is David Pastrnak. He just went on a remarkable 17-game point streak. He had 15 goals and 33 points for the Bruins in that span. And that is the longest point streak of any Czech-born player. So looking at just Czech players in the NHL right now, this is a growing pool. You've got guys, obviously you have Pastrnak, but you've got guys like Martin Necas, Tomáš Hertl, Filip Hronek, and they just won the World Championships last year. Czechia did. So do you think, you talked about the Olympics a second ago, looking at, a potential Team Czechia in the Olympics, how do you think that they could fare? Could they be up there with sort of the big dogs, the powerhouses like Canada, USA, Finland, Sweden at the Olympics?
I mean, they're so good. Gee, they should have been in the Four Nation. Oh, wait a second. No, I think
Five Nations face off.
Not Five Nations. God forbid. I think they're a threat. The one thing I was a little skeptical about was, okay, who's going to be in between the pipes? And they have an emerging goaltender in Lukas Dostal in Anaheim. He's really good. So if you have Dostal as your number one, and they have a couple other goaltenders in the NHL that are pretty decent, you could back up with, say, Peter Mrazek, who's a veteran guy. I think they're a little light on the blue line, but they have a ton of talent up front. And, Pastrnak is annoying because he's so good and he's so consistent. He just scores. I watch him play against Toronto and Buffalo regularly, and he scores every game against them. He's really annoying because he's that consistent and that good. So I give Czechia a good chance of medaling in the Olympics in next February. I think a factor there is, Russia will not be involved, but you're going to have Canada, the U.S., Sweden, and Finland, and a few other countries like Germany and Switzerland that'll be in the mix. But I think they have a good chance to medal.
Yeah, definitely some interesting, like you said, sort of emerging players coming out of Czechia. And then you've got other nations that were not represented in the Four Nations face-off because there cannot be more than four. But even countries like Switzerland, Germany, other countries with some really solid NHL talent who could be making some noise in the Olympics and giving these other teams some fits next year. So I think it'll be really exciting to see the best on best competition between more than just four nations and actually see, as you said, with the omission of Russia, but everyone else, being able to compete there, I think will be really exciting for the game of hockey. All right, I want to wrap up today talking about some prospects. Specifically, I want to talk about Zayne Parekh, who is a prospect for the Calgary Flames. He just recorded his 30th goal of the season on Sunday. So he joins Bobby Orr, guy named Bobby Orr, I don't know if you've heard of him, as the only other defenseman in OHL history to have multiple 30-goal seasons. So next year, he will only be eligible to play in the NHL or the OHL because of the rules with his age. So he can't go to the AHL. Do you think he has a chance of cracking the Flames roster out of camp next season? Or do you think he goes back to the OHL for another year?
He has a chance to make the Flames because he's such a dynamic offensive talent. He was selected 9th overall. But it's uncertain right now how the rules are going to sort of filter out. But there's a possibility he could go to the NCAA, that he could go and play a year of college because, defensemen mature at a slower pace. He's 19 years old. You don't want to put him in the NHL and harm him. He would benefit, but of course the CHL AHL agreement doesn't allow for 19-year-olds unless they're born before December 31st to play in the American Hockey League. So if that avenue is open to him, and right now, like I said, it's cloudy, we don't know whether it is or not. That might be another option for him. But it could be one of those 9-game situations where he gets a taste at the NHL if he plays well at training camp. If he proves that he's not ready, then he goes back to the OHL and plays for Saginaw. But I think if that avenue is open to him, would it be bad for him to play for Michigan or Boston University or somebody like that for a year, playing against stronger, bigger kids, and then coming into the AHL or the NHL at 20? I think that would be a benefit to him.
It's interesting to see what's going to happen with that, because you bring up a really good point. Obviously, there have been players who've run into this issue already. Here in Nashville, they had this issue with Tanner Molendyk, first round pick in 2023. Really has kind of proven all he needs to prove, in the WHL, but still only 19 years old, can't go to the AHL. So they ended up sending him back for one final season. But will be interesting to see, like you said, could benefit from maybe getting a year under his belt of college hockey. It'll be fascinating, I think, to see how this rule change sort of affects the landscape there with the draft and NHL prospects in general. So definitely a fun storyline to keep an eye on, I think, not just with Parekh, but with a bunch of other NHL prospects as well. But for now, that is going to do it for today's pre-trade deadline edition of the Wraparound. Thank you again, Michael, for joining. I'm sure that we will have even more trades and news and updates to talk about on Thursday. But before we do that, just want to say thank you again to Stix.com for sponsoring. We will be back on Thursday, hopefully with some new updates. We'll see you then.